What was your best you have no power here moment? My last sheet job point was hired to be on doing PC repair, only to be told an hour before my first shift that there wasn't any hours available for that and they could put me elsewhere. Begrudgingly I accepted as I turned down another position and needed the work point. Fast forward a few months and the manager decides that I'm going to be filling in for the only person handling shipping and receiving for this giant ass depth store single-handedly with 3 days training. Of course things aren't going so well as this is a 2-person position at a minimum for 8 hours, and I'm expected to do it in 6. The last day on the job I'm swamped as fuck. Vendors are fighting with each other over dock space and another manager comes up freaking out at me because I couldn't get the extra work I had told her repeatedly couldn't be done was done. Exasperated I pleaded my case, to which she callously said I don't give a shit. Now I'm getting mad. She replied to me at this point and says, do you know who you're talking to? I replied, yeah, the Beaches, who is now running this shit show cause I'm out 11.35 an hour with my promised hours gutted. Was not worth it. My mother-in-law passed away last year and my wife and I got rid of the leftover stuff. Most was easy, except the AT&T router for her internet access. We got a total runaround point. I brought it into an AT&T store, the same one my mill had signed up from, and they said it had to be returned in some special box from the local post office. We went to the post office and were told the special box came from AT&T. We went back to AT&T in a different city and were told yet another BS story. It caused my wife an amazing amount of grief. Her mother had just died. She's trying to do the adult thing and responsibly close out her mother's accounts, and AT&T was just being a bunch of ass clowns. The router became her albatross. The router sat in the trunk of the car for weeks. One day I'm grabbing lunch and notice another AT&T. I walk inside and up to a desk where a rep is talking internet plans with another customer. I don't interrupt, but the rep pauses to give me a story about how I can't return the router here and will need to set up a return with the central office. I calmly put the router on her desk and said, no, I won't be doing that. The owner of this account just died. I'm just trying to give you your property back. You've given me the runaround for weeks now and I'm done. As I turn to walk away she yells, but we are just going to throw it away. If you leave it here, you'll get charged for it. Okay, bye me. I toss over my shoulder as I walk out the door. Good luck collecting from a dead woman. I occasionally wonder if the other customer stuck around or not. But then I remember who runs the FCC, and it's not like there's a real choice in ISPs in most areas of the country. TLDR, credit union tried to bill my father's estate for a card they wouldn't provide documentation for. I told them in detail why that wasn't going to happen. After my father passed away, there was a small amount of estate related issues to take care of. I was the legal executor of his estate. While I was sorting through things, I started getting letters from a local credit union regarding a credit card account of his that they wanted paid off. Problem was, I could find no evidence on my end, in all of dad's paperwork, of his having had that credit card. And though I knew he had a savings account with them, I didn't recall any prior bills from them regarding said credit card, and I'd been handling his bills for close to a year before he passed away. I went in to ask for evidence and got told that only the CEO could handle the matter. She was on vacation that week, so I left my name and number to have her get back to me. When she finally called me back, she didn't offer evidence, but instead offered a number of demands that I immediately pay the money and that if there wasn't enough money in dad's estate I should sell the house he had owned for an alleged debt of about $600. Pointing out that he had not, in fact, owned said house for quite some time. By the time he died fell on deaf ears. The letters continued, some personally written and rather harassing in tone. I was feeling rather concerned, as I didn't know exactly what they could do or what my options were. I know the smart thing would have been to retain an estate lawyer to handle it, but what do you do when you're not an attorney and don't have the money to retain one? I had been handling things myself as the most financially minded of my siblings, and trying to handle things as a matter of common sense and common decency. There weren't a lot of assets or debts with the estate. It seemed like it should be pretty straightforward, and other than this one case, all of it went smoothly. Fortunately, Oregon's estate laws are actually really easy to read for a layperson. I spent several nights studying the various sections and determined exactly how things should go and wrote a letter, sent certified delivery with a return receipt, back to the credit union CEO. In the letter I stated the following. First, that as there was no evidence presented for the claim, I was formally denying it in my capacity as executor, which the law allowed, with a window of opportunity of 30 days, to appeal the design decision in court. Second, that if she wished to make an appeal to me personally and save on the court fees, she needed to provide documentation of the account, including a record of all transactions and charges, to justify the amount claimed. Naturally, I got a letter back 4 weeks later. It contained some paperwork, including the paperwork establishing Dad's savings account, but nothing establishing a credit card. Further, the letter stated that it would be too onerous to provide full records of all the transactions. Any bankers out there, take note, never tell a programmer it's too difficult for you to access your own data. We know it's either bullshit or that you're admitting incompetence. This would have been a 5-minute database query for me, and that's if I had to look up the tables first. It reiterated the demand for immediate payment, again stating the house, again, not actually Dad's, but she kept insisting it was, needed to be sold to pay for it. I wrote another letter. In this letter I clarified several points for her. First, that as she had not provided the required documentation, she had not actually made an appeal that would be subject to evaluation, let alone acceptance. Therefore, the original denial of the claim stood unchanged. Second, that it was not her place to determine my father's assets, as she was not executor of the estate. Third, that even if her claim had been granted, Oregon law requires 6 months from the decedent's passing to receive all claims before any of those claims may be paid out, and by demanding immediate payment she was attempting to get me to break the law. Fourth, that Oregon law declares the priority of claims by the nature of them, and credit card debts were ANCN, that is, everything not covered above, where the above included taxes, medical debts, and various other things. Even if her claim had been granted, she could not be paid unless there was money left after paying all higher priority debts, and even if the house had been included that wouldn't have been the case. And fifth, as the 1-month deadline for appealing in court would expire by the time they received this letter, they had exhausted all of their legal options, and further attempts to pursue the claim would constitute unlawful harassment, and charges would be pressed in such an instance. I didn't hear back from them again. I guess probably yesterday. I went to McD's for some dinner and the lady served the guy in front of me first, then started to work on my McFlurry. She was about to put in the M&Ms when the first guy came back, complaining that they usually added more ice cream than that. For the record, he's talking about an inch of ice cream. For anyone unfamiliar with the ice cream going in a cup process of McDonald's, they put the ice cream in first, then put the lid on, then put the toppings in, then swirl it. Dude was mad because the ice cream wasn't going all the way to the top of the lid. After being swirled. Before the argument could really get started, I interrupted them and asked her if she could please finish up my McFlurry before dealing his greedy ass. I remember she said sure, turned to the machine, then turned back to me with an incredulous look on her face and said thank you. Then the dude thanked me too. I quickly informed him not to thank me because I was 100% not on his side at all, and that I thought he was ridiculous for arguing over an inch of ice cream. At this point, she's put the toppings in, and he really said, let's do an analysis here, and started comparing how my McFlurry looked like it had more ice cream in it than his, because it reached halfway up the lid. It's at this point that she pointed out she had yet to swirl it. Lo and behold, once she swirled it, our ice cream looked nearly identical. At this point the manager came over, wondering why this dude had raised his voice. I explained he was mad because he didn't receive an extra inch of ice cream, and got mad that swirling seemingly makes the ice cream magically disappear, and the manager laughed in the guy's face. I was working for a huge clothing store chain as a temp student worker one summer many years ago. I worked there for 2 days before one of the employees started acting weird around me, bossing me around. We weren't working in the same department, so she shouldn't even have been telling me anything. Coming to the changing rooms, where I was folding the discarded clothes, to talk on the internal phone next to me to say, oh my god, the new student hasn't even finished what you asked her to do yet. What the fuck? She's wasting my time and basically just being demeaning for no reason. One day, I realized she was following me around the store, hiding behind clothes racks, or watching me while pretending to be folding pants. She wasn't even in her own area, so she stuck out like a sore thumb. At one point, she started coming up to me to berate me for the smallest things. She was leaving and coming back every few minutes doing the same routine, until she had a real grievance about something I forgot to pick up in the stock room, and she sent me there to do it immediately. I'd been there only a few minutes when, guess who walks in? The crazy stalker. She started yelling at me, telling me everything I did wrong, that I was sitting around instead of working. I sat once to do my shoelaces. She said, "You're faking up my store." She was barely above me, working 20 hours a week. I listened and replied to some things, until she got to the end of her rant, and delivered what was to be her mic drop line. "Well, anyway, you're just a faking temp worker." I just looked at her and said, "Well, yeah, I'm a student. I'm just here to pay my plane ticket to go on vacation. You're stuck here." The best part was she went to talk to the floor manager afterwards, saying I yelled at her and called her all kinds of names. The manager came up to me and told me that the girl was crazy and was doing the same thing every time a new temp student came in, to the point they had a hard time finding student workers. I asked the day after to be sent to another store. I worked this job. My org structure was completely faked. I worked for the regional executive VP of Tech Sheet directly. He'd been my boss, and then he'd been promoted 5, and they hadn't hired anyone. So in a healthy company, he'd have been 5 layers of management above me, but in our company, he was my boss. This is a simplification. He was hired 3 levels over me, VP, and then got the 4th level, state VP, when they fired his counterpart, so he only got bumped once, to regional VP. His boss was the CTO of the whole corporation. And his boss was the C appointed at about this time. They spun off the tech side into its own business unit, with the CTO as the effective CEO. So, if you had a problem with the tech guy, you talked to his manager. Now, remember, my manager is one step below the CTO point. I was in a bad spot. I had a lot of work to do, but no team anymore to help me. All the various teams I was on had once been a really big group, but now, it was just a handful. Maybe 10 guys left out of 150. Still the same amount of work. Or at least, other groups thought so. People would assign me things. And then the various managers of those people would call me and tell me to make that my top priority point. And I would laugh in their faces and tell them to call my boss now. They couldn't call my boss. He didn't work for the same company. They had to call their boss, who would call their boss, etc. until it got to the CEO, and then he would tell the CTO to tell my boss, to tell me to do something. You can guess how many times that happened. If I pissed someone off enough, my boss would call me, and he would say, please, do not talk to that person ever again. People would bluster at me, and I would laugh the laugh of a guy who had the workload of 15 people, and they would get outraged and demand to talk to my boss, and I would laugh even harder, and then give them the number of his secretary, knowing that they would never talk to him, and it wasn't my problem. The only beauty of that job was watching people who thought they had power realize that they had nothing. They weren't even allowed to talk to my boss. He was so high up. They had to escalate their sheet to their boss, and so on. And their boss's boss almost always told them to STFU and get back to work. Nothing ever came into my work queue from someone who was remotely at my level, and the but that was incredible. It was glorious. I worked for a company that had one of those video game buses with the TVs and couches and sheet on the inside. I was the only employee and was technically the event manager and supervisor. That was just a fancy term for me being the only one to drive the truck and set it up and do maintenance on it and cheat. All my boss did was schedule bookings and tell me where I was going. I processed the payments as well, so I was basically in charge of the entire operation. This woman came into the trailer at the end of a party to bitch at me since her kid didn't have enough fun. I told her all the other kids were having a great time and nobody else complained. She insisted I'd give her a full refund since her kid didn't enjoy himself, and I told her I wasn't going to do that. She asked who my manager was, and I told her I was the manager. She then asked who my employer was, and I told her his name. She demanded I call him, so she could talk to him, and on speakerphone, my boss said I wasn't there to see how things were going. It's up to nudes for compliment to determine whether a refund is called for or not. Side note, while he was technically my boss, it was more like two friends running a business. He's a few years older than me and hired me off the street, but we were both in our 20s at the time. He just turned 30 like 6 months ago, and his dad paid for everything for him. Very wealthy family, so he wasn't really concerned about sucking the customer's dick. Point, I ended up telling her I wasn't going to refund the entire $350 because one kid didn't have a good time and promptly left. What's funny is a bunch of the parents at the event apparently got raving reviews from their kids, and that party actually brought in like 8 new customers, a few of which booked us multiple times a year. She apparently tried talking bad about the company to the other parents, but that didn't seem to stop them, since everyone else had a great time. I miss that job. Best job I ever had. This guy used to come into the movie theater I worked at every Monday night. Apparently he had worked there before, but I had been there for like 6 years at this point, and I had never worked with him. Point anyway, every time he would come in, he would come late to the very last movie and then expect us to pop fresh popcorn and put new hot dogs on the clean grill. We would save the last batch of popcorn in a plastic bag and keep the hot dogs in a steam drawer, so it's not like we didn't have what he wanted. He just wanted special treatment. Then he would try to pull that scam where he gives the cashier a $100 bill and then adds stuff to his order and takes stuff away to confuse the cashier and get free stuff. He was always super rude. When I got promoted to management, I was finally able to stand up to him a little. I said something like, "You come in here every Monday, talk down to my cashier, and try to scam us out of money. I'm not going to put up with it anymore." Dude flipped out. Started saying how he used to work here, so he knows how everything works, okay, and how he's on the city council of a different city in a different county. I'm pretty sure I just laughed and said, "You're in my city, so that doesn't matter." He was pissed, but he actually started being less rude and stopped trying to scam us altogether. Eventually he stopped coming. I don't even know why he came to my theater, since his city has like 2 to 3 to choose from, one being the same chain that mine was. Fuck you, Griffin. 2 different moments, both relating to my mother. The first was when I was 19 and we were driving to the college campus for registration. It was stressful. She was bent out of shape and being even more controlling than usual. I said something she didn't like, either said "screw you" or called her a bitch. She slapped me across the face. I kind of blinked, and then I realized that I was over 18 and no longer legally obligated to quietly take being slapped around. I told her that the next time she hit me, I'd hit her back, and that I was stronger than she was. That was the last time she raised a hand to me, and I'm not sorry at all. The next was several years later. I had finally gotten my act together, rented an apartment, and was moving out. I was moving the last load of stuff from their place to my apartment, and she was standing in the apartment parking lot. She asked for the house key back, and I handed it over. I was no longer living here, and her house, her rules, whatever. She then told me that I was not to give a key to my apartment to my then boyfriend. I just smiled and nodded, because there was no point in having an argument about it. I'm now very happily married to the boyfriend that she so despised. Literally, she told me that she never wanted to see him again, and that if that meant she'd never see me again, she was fine with it, and I have no contact with her. I got into an argument with a coworker while waiting at a train station about my lack of religious beliefs. She actually interfered in my conversation with someone else and ended up becoming offended by it. We rode the same bus and train to work every day because we also lived in the same apartments. Well, later that same week, I got promoted to supervisor, and guess who is on my team? That's right, the coworker who hates me. She was the worst employee I ever had, but I tried to work with her. Eventually, I had to write her up for call avoidance. But she went to ours and told them that I was being unfair to her and cited her religion as the reason why. She told ours about the conversation we had, but neglected to tell them that it didn't happen on company grounds. Hours ND my boss comes to me to talk about where I set them straight, but since religion was involved it was decided to not ruffle any feathers, so she got off. Knowing that she had it in for me, I decided to only communicate with her through my team lead. And once again, she was avoiding calls, so I wrote her up again. This time, I allowed time to pass and tracked all of her time and got so much data that ours couldn't ignore it. Once again, she tried to cry foul and claim religious harassment. But little did she know, I had my team lead and my boss watching her as well. This time, she had no recourse and ours agreed to allow me to fire her. That was the best feeling in the world. No one will read this. Here goes. I worked at a residential psychiatric facility. A kid had cut herself up pretty badly and was trying to use the blood as a weapon. Because she was there as part of her probation we had to call the police. While we were waiting for the police to arrive she was trying to cut herself up even more with shards from the mirror. I had to restrain her and, during the struggle, she passed out. The police arrived and found me on the floor with her head in my lap. There was a lot of blood. She was clearly passed out. One of the officers looked me straight in the eyes and said that if she got aggressive again they would step in. Without dropping his stare I asked him what he thought that would look like. The subtext was me challenging his authority, which I was. He told me that they would do what was necessary and put her in cuffs. I looked down at the girl in my lap. She wasn't more than 100 pounds. The only real damage she had done was to herself. She had been begging for us to let her die and only used blood to keep us away from her. I returned his stare and told him there was no way two men she didn't know were going to put their hands on this young girl. She had been violently raped by men and abused most of her life. Incredulous, he asked if I wanted them here at all. No, I don't see the necessity of you being here. She's not a threat and we called you only because we were required to do so. They left. Or that's what I thought. Once the kid came around and we got her cleaned up, my supervisor came in and told me that the cops wanted to talk with me. They want to arrest you. You're going to have to act really sorry. I did. I lied my ass off and acted really sorry because it wasn't about me. It was about that kid and not allowing her to be further traumatized. So I licked his boots like a man. Because fuck that guy. Worked for a shoe company as a shoe salesman. I was pretty good at my job, but our regional manager had some beef with my manager. He spent most of the phone calls belittling my manager and criticizing our performance, but he never visited our store. After months of threatening to fire my manager he forced my boss's hand and made him resign. The company typically had someone take over your apartment, and as a final fuck you the regional decided the new manager would pick their own place. During the transition from old manager to new my co-assistant manager came and told me that our regional said I wasn't going to cut it over the phone to corporate. If he bothered to look at my numbers he'd have seen I was top sales regionally every month for the 6 I'd been there. I'd already had problems with this regional manager and the new manager was an ass. While this transition is going down a couple I'm familiar with came in to buy shoes from me. They asked for me by name. I'd worked with them many times. It was so satisfying to see them snub my regional until I stepped in. They told me they just got married and we are going on a trip. They needed shoes for pretty much everything. So I sold them $2,000 worth of shoes. My regional sat slack-jawed after he rung up the order. All sales over $1,500 had to be reported to corporate. It only happened once or twice a month nationwide that this call happened. He had to call his bosses whom he'd been talking shit to about me all day and tell them I'd just made the largest sale in our store's 3-year history. I quit on the spot and called corporate to tell them why I would no longer be working for them. I went back to that store 2 weeks ago to see how the store was doing and the regional no longer works for the company. I hope I had some hand in his removal. I work as a construction inspector for a third-party firm that contracts to government, state, local, and occasionally Fed levels. I always wear plain vest/hard hat/etc without logo the first couple visits to the job because I get used as a troubleshooter on problem jobs. I went out to a Fed-funded highway project as a Federal Highway Administration contractor to audit their processes. I signed in at the trailer per standard procedure, not hiding who I was, but wearing my plain gear. I started walking the project and see numerous things that were either belonged in r/OSHA or were against standard practice, including concrete for barrier walls not being tested and soil backfill not being tested. The contractor for the job was a local power, think a certain state east of PA, and think like Tony Soprano, but construction instead of trash, who had run off the local Fed inspector. As I'm almost finished with my walkthrough, the job super comes over to me and starts yelling and cussing at me to get back to where I was supposed to be, thinking I was a laborer, so I tell him I'm the inspector. He then proceeds to tell me, BS, we took care of that. Do you know who I am? I then told him I did, took out my credentials, and informed him that I was stopping work on the project until a full audit was completed. End results: the general contractor got kicked off a job where it's almost impossible to be kicked off of. TLDR, I'm the inspector. Contractor gave me the "do you know who I am?" and I shut the job down because of their sheet practices and attitude. Worked in a tropical fish warehouse. Owners pretended to be nice and always said they had your back if you were a loyal employee. They only kept 2 to 3 full-time employees on staff, so no one else could get vacation time or benefits or anything like that. I worked there long enough that I eventually made it to the supervisor of the floor and full-time. They wouldn't call me a supervisor, cause that would mean they owed me more money. They never took blame for anything. Couldn't figure out why fish were doing, even though I was telling them why. They simply ordered too many at a time. People didn't want to come in on days off to help them move to a new building. It was somehow my fault. The whole moving process was poorly done. I had to get fish from 2 buildings somehow. They wouldn't take my advice. I knew they wouldn't, cause they told me that when my employees brought a suggestion to me, that I should politely tell them no, no matter what. Our process was perfect. It was not. After 9 years of their bullshit, they finally broke me. They kept adding hours for me without okaying it with me. Thursday was a quick care for the fish day. Then I spent it with my family, as my wife had Thursdays off. During a meeting, where she was threatening to fire my assistant supervisor and I, because I swept the wrong part of the floor, because her instructions were vague, I mentioned that I didn't want the extra time of putting fish away on Thursdays, cause it was my family time, and I was never asked about it, just told that we are getting fish Thursday, which meant I would have to somehow stay busy and wait cause the delivery schedule was wonky. She told that if I wanted to see family, I would have to get a different job. It took everything I had to not lose it. I needed to keep my income until I had a new job. But that was last straw point. When I finally gave her my 2-week notice, she looked completely bewildered. Just stared at with her mouth hanging open. Eventually she put on her best fake caring voice and asked why. I was dumbfounded by that question. I almost yelled, "You told me to. If I wanted to see my family, I would need a new job. You told me that. So I found a new job." She tried to explain to me that she would never say that and told me I was wrong. I told her that she said exactly that and I had a witness and would happily go get him to confirm. Here's the sweet part. After my 2 weeks and her making jokes daily about how much next job would suck and I should just stay, I got to leave. I handed her my keys a couple hours before I left. Then finished my work, punched out and never looked back. She called me about a half hour later and said she thought we had an exit interview and that she would be in her office for a while longer. I told her there was no exit interview because I knew how they went. She would tell me her opinions as if they were facts and not listen to a thing I said. I knew because she made me sit in on 2 exit interviews so I could see how they ran it. Then I hung up and deleted her number from my phone. I know someone who is a high school teacher. Her worst, most annoying student was the type to tell rich gold digger mommy one story, while what really played out in class was a whole different one. My friend would help her in class, and even outside of class, staying at school on her own time, to help her on the schoolwork she assigned. One day annoying student decides to cheat on my friend's test by getting a friend to send her the answers. Her friend had a different version. My friend then blatantly sees that she put the answers to the other version on her test. My friend pitied her and gave her a second chance to redeem herself. She failed the second test. She then told mommy that my friend had intentionally given her a harder test to watch her fail. She left out the part where she was given a different test in the first place because she cheated on the other. So mommy comes into school, screams at my friend and the principal for being unfair. She then gets the mouthful of what her daughter had done and continues to scream about how what happened was unfair. Principal gets deputies to escort her out with a write-up in hand for her daughter for 10 days suspension and a note that says getting caught cheating automatically kicks you out of any honors societies, clubs, and potential scholarship money from certain organizations. All of that could have been avoided if rich gold digger student hadn't tried to worm her way out of one bad grade. She later passed that class with a D. I worked for a guy, Scott, running a beer festival. I was hired on as the logistics coordinator, which means pretty much everything except sales and marketing fell under my umbrella. Scott put up all the financial backing for the festival and had a partner of sorts, Wayne, who was really only involved because it was his idea, and had Scott just taken it, Wayne would have sued. Wayne was a real pitter and probably one of the slowest, dumbest people I have ever met. Everything you discussed with him was met with resistance until he decided it was his idea. After that it was the best idea. Scott kept Wayne out of the loop on most things, which worked for me because it meant I got to do my own stuff, meet with Scott weekly for updates, and use his credit card to order what we needed. As the event neared, Wayne dropped by our office more and more frequently, so we started locking the door under the guise of the wind blowing it open. But we wouldn't unlock it when he came to the door. The windows were tinted, so we could see him, but he couldn't see us. This only made him more agitated and difficult to deal with. Things really came to a head the day of the event because he wasn't happy with where I had the company drop off the dumpster. I'm on site in a golf cart full of ice bags. I'm sweaty, I'm dirty, and I'm tired. I stop for a moment to have a drink of water, and he approaches and starts really giving it to me about the dumpster. I'm pretty sick of his shit, and my contract was up in 2 weeks and I hadn't taken the option to renew. I put my feet up on the dash, drop my sunglasses over my eyes, and start looking at something on my phone. I tell him that I'm not moving the dumpster, and it's my decision, so it's final. He decides this is the best time, in front of a dozen breweries, food trucks, and community volunteers, to pull the "don't you know who signs your paycheck" card. I look at him, take my feet off the dash and hit the gas. As I whiz by, middle finger in the air, I shoot back, yeah, Scott does. He hasn't spoken to me in almost 5 years, and we run into each other around 3-4x a year at industry events. When I first got out of school and was trying to get into an actual career instead of just a job, I ran into the same problem most people do, and everywhere wanted someone with more experience, something that is hard to get when you spent your last 4 to 6 years getting a degree instead. I got an interview with a company that I wasn't particularly interested in, but had heard good things about their training and development programs. It was a very entry-level management position, but as I went through the interview and they described their process, I was very impressed and got quite excited about the prospect. I found out it was a pretty extensive interview process, and I had to come in for another interview with another level of management. After several attempts by myself to set up another interview, and came in and was moved to what I thought was the final interview process, an interview with the GM of the regional operations. I met with him and was told that I should hear back shortly, and if hired, I would be flown to another city to meet with the head office and formally begin my training. The whole process took about 4 weeks, but I was excited because I felt like I nailed it every step of the way. In the meantime, I got another interview for a job that I was way underqualified for, and because I pretty much thought I had no chance at getting it and had another job all but in hand, I was pretty open about my lack of experience, but my willingness to embrace it as a challenge. Well, apparently there was a perfect combination of them appreciating my honesty and also having the opportunity to have the guy leaving the job with enough time to properly show me the ropes. So I ended up getting a job that paid almost twice as much as the first one, combined with a lot more responsibility. 2 full weeks later, I got an email from the first job saying they were sorry, but it came down to me and 2 other candidates, and they had some concerns about one of my answers to a question, so they went a different direction. Being able to send an email back, thanking them for the opportunity, but explaining that, due to the amount of time that had passed, I had already taken a position with a company that put a higher value on my time, both during the interview process and during my employment, was one of the most enjoyable emails I've ever sent. So, one day this large gentleman came into my store. He was pissed, and he was huge, and in this small town everyone knew he was a real wife beater. To put this into perspective, I'm an average height female and his biceps were as big as my head. Well, he decided to wait until the store manager was gone, and to yell at me, the only female, to try and argue policy, to intimidate me. GameStop. New system didn't like it. Wanted his money back. Little did he know, I was the assistant store manager. I worked in our district's highest volume store. I had been there longer than my manager by 2 years. I grew up in an abusive household. My fields were barren of all facts. And to put the icing on the cake, I was leaving for a better job point. So I stand there quietly letting him rant and rave as other guests meekly watch from behind the displays. I did not really interject with anything other with "Sir, policy states 30th. Of course, this really gets him going, and just makes his head go from red to purple. He starts pounding his fist on the counter. Finally, he asked, "What are you going to do about this?" Calmly, I reply, "Sir, I'm going to wait for you to either calm down, or for you to hit me." The man looked like he wanted to, but he said he was calling corporate and left. He did. District manager called. He knew I was leaving, and just sounded like it. You can't challenge guests. And was just really done with it. TLDR, jaded retail worker tells an own wife beater to sit down or square up because wife beater was unhappy with purchase. At first I was going to say something like my entire life is being on the receiving end of those moments, but then I remembered there was one moment that might apply. TLDR, because I'm not the best at telling my own stories. A Steam code crate subscription service called Ubercred tried to steal from me, but I pointed out a flaw in their system that pressured them into giving me all of my money back. I also turned off and replaced my card because of it. Sometime last year, my dad and I got scammed hard by a monthly video game loot box type subscription service called Ubercred. It started when my dad gave me a coupon code for a free month of their service. So basically 10 Steam codes, which is the content of one box, but I had to sign up with a card and pick a subscription plan with no refunds. They were very blatant in that no refunds would be given, supposedly because they physically can't, in order to use the coupon. Now, part of what made me realize this was a scam was that they had a trade system with a very high saturation of a small handful of games, not enough to set off any major alarms, but enough to get me thinking. After I got my box, which was more repeats than new games, I looked for how to cancel my subscription when I noticed what should have set off every "this is a scam" alarm in me. The way you cancel is that you have to use their in-program messaging to contact them and ask to remove your subscription. I did just that, and I haven't heard anything from them until a few months later. Another feature of this, by the way, is a payment tracker that tells you when you've made payments towards them, even with coupons. This is important point. After a few months, I checked my balance with my bank's app when I noticed a large amount of money was taken from my account by Ubercred and a new charge from them was pending. They charged me for 2 months of their service and were trying for a third. Disputing the third charge would have saved me the one charge, but my money for the other 2 would be lost, because they apparently also have a policy of totally banning anybody who disputes a charge from them. After requesting a refund for the month they claimed I was subscribed to them, I got the message saying you never asked to be unsubscribed, and under no exception do we give refunds. After that point I noticed one giant, glaring flaw in their system. The dates from the payments for my bogus subscription were all listed under the same day. I took a picture and then pointed this out in a response to their message with "It's not that I didn't request to be unsubscribed, it's that you failed to acknowledge it." Also, all of the dates for the payments are for the day before yesterday, even the one for the free coupon from 2 months ago. I got a message saying that I got a full refund as a one-time exception. Checked my app to confirm, and I subsequently turned off the card until I replaced it. As a starting engineer, my first job was as a sales engineer for a company that provided nuclear safety products. This was the kind of place where, for each sale, you had to write a report about an inch thick. The manager would open the front cover, read down the page, circle the first punctuation error and hand it back, not even reading the substance of the report. Total jackass. His boss, the owner, would bring in engineers once a week and grill them for 30 minutes about their sales, keep pecking and making shitty remarks until he found something, and then berate them incessantly. As a result, the good engineers didn't stay long, and most of the rest were B/C team. I needed the job, so I stayed as long as I could. I had been working a number of very large sales that were taking a while to land. After some particularly rough couple of days, the owner pulled me into his office on a Wednesday, and having noticed that my sales were down, proceeded to tell me that my performance wasn't adequate, amongst other demeaning comments. I went home that night very upset. I mowed the lawn and thought hard about it. The next day, Thursday, I walked into his office and gave my notice, saying that I agreed with him, that my performance was lacking, and that I needed to find a better place to work. He grunted assent, nothing more. I went back to work. The next day, Friday, the owner did his usual inquisition thing with all the engineers. I was last. In the intervening 48 hours, since he admonished me, all my big sales landed. I went into his office and waited for the shitty comments. He was really quiet, pulled out his calculator, and realized that my sales were the equivalent to 30% of his annual revenue. He just looked at me and said, "You didn't do this in 2 days." "No," I said, "but they were on my list of quotes when we met on Wednesday." He looked at the reports and dismissed me. Later that day, I went to lunch, took a longer lunch, and came back to see everyone but me in the conference room listening to him expound about clarity of communication. That was my last day. A few weeks later, I bump into a coworker and we talk. Seems that all the accounts had been transferred to other engineers, but the clients had cancelled all my sales after they found I had left the company 30% of millions of dollars. It was a big lesson for me that micromanagement will kill your workforce morale and ultimately the bottom line. Just finished building a PC for some kid's Christmas present. The mother was not nice at all and kept calling us every single day about why it was not done yet and how she should have just got it from Best Buy for cheaper the day it was done. She tried to negotiate the price down by showing us a list of all the parts we emailed to her that we were using, and her using prices for the parts she found from literally everywhere. There were Best Buy and Fry's Black Friday advertisements for parts that only looked similar and a printout of an eBay page with the same graphics card, but used. After this was all done, we told her she could pay the rest of what she owes, which was about a quarter cost of the parts and the assembly cost minus what was used for deposits. She was told, as per our policy, we will keep the assembly cost and the deposit made, and we will refund the rest. We sell similar builds to this all the time, so selling it as a whole system with no assembly will be easy. So she has to sit there and hear this explanation, and she bitterly paid the difference. A week later we see she posted a scathing review of the place, naming all those on staff as criminals and racists who make fun of their customers, and saying how she will be pressing charges against the owner for his employees threatening to steal her money. Working as the lead dude in a network operations center for a small regional ISP, I had been there long enough to know what I could and couldn't do. One area has a large power outage that, after cascading failures of backup power measures, caused the core site to die, leaving a few hundred customers without internet and phone. The phones in the NOC are ringing off the hook, as you might imagine, and any of the bigger customers are getting directly passed to my desk. I'm doing my best to calmly explain that we were aware of the issue and were working to resolve it, while also attempting to coordinate a team with backup power equipment that was en route to the site. Multi-million-dollar accounts. And they're all just like, "Cool, man. Thanks for the update." Somehow or another, I end up with a guy that owns a small local flower shop. He's been a customer for years and somehow knows me by name. Him. "Hi Victim, a fair load. This is $USER at a flower shop. Our internet isn't working, and I can't process orders. I want someone out here now. Point me. Yes sir, we are aware of an issue affecting your service, and are working to restore it as soon as possible. However, I don't currently have an eater for you. He starts screaming, victim a fair load, when I yell people faking jump. I said I want someone out here now. Point me. No one here is jumping. You're one of hundreds of users affected, and we are fixing it as fast as possible. Now can we have a adult conversation about this, or are you going to keep screaming at me? Point him. I said I faking want someone here now. Hangs up. Point after that he called back a handful of times, eventually reaching the owner of the company to complain about me. The guy started screaming at the owner, who also then hung up on him. After hanging up the phone, I was instructed to create a gear retrieval ticket. There is seriously no time for people that scream. Not my best, but probably my most recent point. I had recently started back at my old part-time job, where I've known most of the employees for years, and had been pretty good friends with them. However, they got a new store manager since the last time I'd worked there, and he was a stickler for rules. Earlier that day he told me no customers behind the counter, no exceptions. It's a safety hazard. Which is understandable, and I agreed with. Now, we had this one customer, we'll call him Bob, that would come in with an SD card and stand behind the counter next to this computer waiting for you to come over, no matter how long the line was and how swamped we were, and do his job. Point on this particular day I was standing at the complete opposite side in front of a computer, with no one in front of me. So he walked around and past me, ignoring where I was, and expected me to come to him. I walked over and kindly asked him to please stay on the opposite side of the counter as it is a safety hazard. Bob: oh, you don't know me. I'm a regular. Me: yes, I'm aware. Please step to the other side of the counter. My store manager has requested that this policy is to be enforced. Point Bob: well, I need to see the screen. Point me. Sure, I can turn it so you may see it. Point Bob: well, I'll need the mouse too. Point me. I can also pass you the mouse when needed. Bob: look, I need to be on this side of the counter. Me: we can go to the other computer that swivels around if you'd prefer. It would be much easier for you to view your documents. Bob: no, I use this computer. Me: well, we can use the other one today. Point Bob: look, I just saw your assistant store manager walk through the door. I'm sure you don't want to lose your job over this. At this point I was getting upset, but that made me laugh inside. Me: oh, I can call her over if you'd like. She will tell you the same thing I just did, and I can guarantee you, I won't get fired. It's a safety hazard. All customers must stay on the opposite side of the counter. No exceptions. We can use the other computer if you'd like. Point. He relented and never gave me a hassle about it again. I have a cousin. She's a couple of years younger than me, and she is really attractive. She has done model shoots for magazines, used to work as a promo girl for all kinds of events. When she moved to my town, all my male friends always ask me stuff about her. A lot of the guys in our town had a huge thing with her, and they'd do anything for her. She had one of my closest friends clean her yard for her every weekend. Guys would help her move stuff, let her borrow anything she wants. Basically, she could get guys to do anything they want. I found it funny, because I don't think I ever did anything like that for a girl I liked, so it was bizarre seeing guys volunteer to do anything for her. Anyway, one day she came to my house looking to borrow my car. She wanted to go to the city for the weekend to go shopping. I never let anyone borrow my car, but definitely would never let her as she had a history of crashing her cars. We argued for a bit and finally she done this thing. She fluttered her eyelids at me and said, "Come on please," and at that very moment it clicked in my head, holy shit, this is the look she does to get guys do anything she wants. I'm pretty she'd done it subconsciously, like it came natural to bat her eyelids when asking for favors, but I still just laughed at her and said, "You can bat your eyelids all you want, there's no way you are taking my car." She cracked the sheets, stormed out and didn't talk to me for a week. Sorry for formatting as I'm on mobile. Point. This goes back many years to when I was 15 or 16 years old. I'm turning 45 this year. Back then, I was involved with the RCAC at the local armory, British Columbia Dragoons. This is important to this story point. While at school taking phys ed, we had a substitute teacher for the day. The teacher had just been employed by the local school district and was a floater for a little while. They were also going to be the assistant coach for the school's track and field team. Anyways, Mr. Teacher was looking for students for the track team and asked if I would try out for the team. I said I was interested, but also said that it would depend on which day's practice was held, as I had cadets on Tuesdays. Mr. Teacher says track practice is Tuesdays, so I told him, sorry, no can do, as that would interfere with cadets. At this point I thought, wrongly it turns out that this was the end of it. The next day, as I'm entering the school, Mr. Teacher sees me and says that he expects me to be at track practice the next week. I told him, no I wouldn't be, as I had cadets to attend. I continued walking into the school and went to my first class/home room. At around lunchtime, I went to the student union kiosk to purchase some snacks to go with my lunch. Mr. Teacher spots me and tells me again that he expects to see me at track practice. I again inform him that I have a prior commitment on Tuesdays and that I wouldn't be there. This continued for the next 3 or so weeks, but escalating every day until he started threatening that he would have me kicked out of school if I didn't show up for track. By this point, I had had enough. I had informed Miko the week prior as to what this teacher was trying to do, and Miko told me that I was to call him if it got out of hand, and when I had a chance, I went to the office and asked to talk to the principal, as I needed a secure way of making a phone call. Using the principal's telephone and phone book, I called Miko and informed him that it had hit the point of no return. What happened next was a thing of beauty, even though it took 2 more weeks to accomplish. As I'm talking to Miko in the principal's office, and the principal is still there mind you, Miko tells me to inform Mr. Teacher that if he continues to interfere with me, he will be brought up on treason charges for attempting to suborn a soldier of the Queen and interference with prior commitment to the Queen. 25+ years ago, I may have got some of this wrong. And, yes, these are serious charges. The next 9 school days, Mr. Teacher is continuing his harassment, and I have informed him each time of what he was facing. If he continued 11 school days after the talk with Miko, I was called from class to go to the principal's office. Upon arrival, I saw my mom sitting to one side of the room and Miko in uniform sitting on the other side of the principal's desk. When I saw Miko in uniform, I quickly braced to attention and continued into the principal's office. The principal asked me to take a seat and that we would be joined by Mr. Teacher in approximately 5 minutes. The principal had me explain to my mom what the reason was for the meeting. After doing that as quickly as I could, the principal asked me a few questions about my time in cadets and how/if I liked it, which I did. Although a few years later, I hated it due to other issues, but that's a whole different story. Shortly after this, Mr. Teacher showed up and had a smarmy/snarky look on his face when he saw me sitting in the office. Mr. Teacher started in on me about the track thing again before the principal had a chance to make any introductions. As soon as my mom was introduced, Mr. Teacher started in on me about crying to mommy about what was happening. The principal stopped Mr. Teacher and informed him that it was not my mom who had requested the meeting, but that it was Miko who had, and that my mom had just been informed about what was happening. Mr. Teacher started blustering that Miko had no right to call for a meeting, and Miko had no right to be there, especially in uniform. Miko asked Mr. Teacher what he thought he was doing, threatening to have me kicked out of school for not attending or joining the track team. Mr. Teacher gave some excuse or other that track was more important than cadets, and that if I wasn't at track on the next Tuesday, I would be kicked out of school. Miko asked the principal if he could make the phone call. The principal said yes, and Miko picked up the phone and made the phone call that ended Mr. Teacher's career. The phone call, I later found out, had been set up 3 weeks before. It turns out that Miko had talked with his direct superior, who then bounced it to his direct superior, who proceeded to take a short walk to the office Lieutenant Governor General of Canada and presented him with the issue of what to do with issue facing one Cadet Corporal Gigi 1973. Miko talked on the telephone for a few moments and they asked Mr. Teacher to take the handset. Mr. Teacher grudgingly took the phone and, still being the prick, started to mouth off. It still brings a smile and a chuckle to me when the memory of his face bubbles to the surface. Mr. Teacher's face went cold and white when he found out who he was going to be talking to. As I only heard the one-syllable word side of the very short conversation, I can only surmise as to what was said by the Lieutenant Governor General of Canada to that miserable excuse of a so-called teacher. After Mr. Teacher was done answering yes sir and no sir, mostly yes sir, and had passed the phone back to Mr. Teacher made a half-assed apology to me. I told him I did not accept his apology on my behalf, but I would on the Queen's behalf as an NCO should. I was dismissed back to class by the principal shortly thereafter, and told that I need not worry about Mr. Teacher after that. Mr. Teacher was gone from the school the next day, and let go by the school district shortly after that. What Mr. Teacher had explained to him, after I went back to class, was that interference with someone in cadets or the reserves was a very serious charge, and that he was lucky that it didn't go as far as it could have, for if it had, Mr. Teacher would have been talking to a royal personage, and then been seeing what it was like in a prison cell for the next few years. I was manager of a convenience store for about 5 months. Let me tell ya, my favorite thing to do was let customers know that their temper tantrums made no difference to me. I had the cops on speed dial and was willing to give them a ring at any point a customer started a disturbance. A lot of locals who came in respected me for my no BS attitude and supported me when I was dealing with someone who was being an ass. To make it all too better, I'm only 5 feet, looked like I'm only about 15, but was 20 at the time, which was still fairly young to be a manager, since I was actually the youngest member of staff. I really am not someone you would expect to be in charge of a store, let alone stand up for my employees and myself. The best time was when a customer came in who wanted us to just turn on the gas pump for them so they could pay afterwards. Big no, because that is how drive-offs happen. We always told customers that if they wanted to fill up, they either needed to prepay, use their card, leave us some insurance that they will come back in, credit card or car keys mainly, or wait for us to make a photocopy of their driver's license and take down their phone number and address, and then watch as we shredded it afterwards. I was heading out the door after a 14-hour day. I was exhausted and felt like crap from morning sickness at the time. He came in, and my employee on register informed this man that he couldn't turn on the pump. He started yelling, getting red in the face, and saying we were running a bad business for not turning on the pump. I was standing right there and informed him that if he didn't like our policy, the office number was listed right next to the register, and I was even willing to dial it for him on the store phone. He kept getting more and more angry, and I didn't even realize I was yelling back at him until the whole thing was over. All the while, my husband and a regular local are standing a few feet away. This guy demands to speak to a manager. I inform him I'm the manager. He doesn't like that. He turns around to my hubs and the other guy and asks if they believe I'm the manager. They both say yes, because it's true. Finally, being tired and frustrated, I say very loudly, "Sir, you have 3 options. Prepay your gas, call the office, or allow me to call the police." I had my phone in my hand, ready to dial. The regular guy just laughs and says, "That's a great answer." The look on this man's face as he realized that he was powerless in this situation against a rather young girl was priceless. He finally handed my employee $40 and walked out. He even tried to laugh it off with the regular guy and my husband to, I guess, try and save some of his dignity. I thanked the regular guy for having my back and apologized to my employee for raising my voice right next to him. I didn't even really get to enjoy the moment until later, because at the time, I was just so done with the day and done with that guy's attitude. It was Christmas Eve. I was working at a supermarket. It was a Thursday, the one day I always worked 9 AM to 5 PM. Other days I worked different hours. At no point had they asked me to work different hours to cover the festive rush. Other people on different shifts were working 11 AM to 7 PM, which was when the store closed. So it gets to 4:30 and our manager tells us no one is going home until 7 PM when the store closes because it will affect morale if we don't all leave together. Affect morale. Bullshit. We were also unhappy. It was Christmas bloody Eve and we were stuck in a godforsaken supermarket being treated like shit by both customers and managers alike. Affect morale my, as if they had offered me overtime, or even asked me privately beforehand. But they hadn't. So 5 PM came around, I went and got my stuff. I was walking out of the building with my coat on when the manager storms towards me. This woman was like umbrage, all sweetness and light covering up severe beachiness. She asks me, Pauline, where are you going? We're all finishing at 7 PM tonight. No Tratsy, I work 9 to 5 today. I've worked my shift, and I'm going home for Christmas. She went purple, and replied, I expect you back to work in 5 minutes. Pauline, you're letting the team down. She had nothing that could keep me there, nothing in writing that said I had agreed the overtime. On paper I had done my hours. I just replied Merry Christmas, Tratsy, and left. I wish I could say I quit on the spot, or shouted at her, and my colleagues applauded me. But no, I went back after Christmas cause I needed the job. But the little justice bonus are just as important when you're stuck in a job like that. When I was in college, I took a job from a moron. I knew he was a moron about halfway through the interview, but he was willing to let me work around my class schedule. I didn't care how stupid he was, as long as he was writing checks. 2 months later, it turns out he's more of a moron than I thought. A welder/shop foreman with supposedly more than 20 years experience was unable to understand manufacturing tolerances and how they applied to welding parts together. So he stops returning my calls and is never at the office/shop. 3 months later, he's still not paid my last 3 paychecks. I finally catch him in his office. When I asked why it would take that long to pay me, he replied, just haven't been able to get around to it. The accountant has been too busy to write the checks, and shrugged. But he happened to have some more work that he wanted me to do. Every check had come from the checkbook sitting on his desk, in his own handwriting, signed by him and him alone. I had never seen or heard a word from this accountant that he claimed my pay went through. I had planned on telling him that he had until Friday to pay me, but his completely dismissive attitude and the shrug changed my mind. Moron, I don't work here anymore. You can pull out that checkbook and pay me now, the same as every other check has been, or you can hear it from the labor department. They found that he had not paid 13 total employees in the year prior to me calling them, but it had been smaller amounts. One of my first jobs was a cashier at a gas station close by my house. We were always busy because we sold gas for a few cents cheaper than the other local gas stations, and people will go way out of their way just to save a few cents. Because of this, we would get calls in the morning and night from the company that delivered all the fuel asking us to check the tank levels to see if we needed another delivery. One night my boss calls, who is also the store owner, and asks me to check the tank levels to see if we need another delivery. I run the report, and as I'm reading the levels to her, a man walks in, slams a $20 bill on the counter and demands that I get off the phone and get back to work. The tone of the guy's voice was so loud that my boss overheard him through the phone and asked what was happening. I then repeated to her that a man was demanding I get off the phone and get back to work. She then proceeds to tell me to hang on the phone and let's have a chat. She starts asking me how my day is going and what my plans are for the weekend. We actually talk on the phone for a few minutes while this guy gets completely red in the face. Eventually we hang up and I walk up to the counter and with the classic big smile and cheery voice ask, how can I help you today, sir? The guy doesn't say a word, just leaves the 20 on the counter and walks out still completely red in the face. The classic kill them with kindness put that guy over the edge. I once worked in a casual fine dining restaurant for a young, creative, curt female chef. We made everything in-house and the specials came as is. No modifications, no ingredient swapping for this or that. Take it or order something else. The owner/chef would back us up on this, enter as whole, who orders the special. A bacon cheeseburger with bacon jam in / on the burger, fries soaked in bacon grease, a side of bacon, etc. He asks for no bacon on the burger, different sides, different toppings, etc. I tell him that unfortunately I could not modify the special, it came as is, and I suggest he order something else. He blows a gasket on me in front of everyone. Tells me to tell the chef that she's an idiot. Huffs and puffs. Rolls his eyes, tells me that it's almost a human rights violation if he had said he couldn't eat bacon for religious reasons and I was unwilling to accommodate him. Lol no. Then tells me that he'll be sure to give us a Twitter shout out for being so insane. Lets me know he won't be tipping a cent and that he wants to speak to the chef because he can't believe someone would do this, etc. I must be lying and lazy. I go and tell the chef. Chef comes out to the table, asks in front of everyone which one of them thought she was an idiot, kicked him and the group out on the spot and told him that she will never accept a reservation under his name again and that if she sees him in her restaurant in the future she will call the police. I have a boss who has severe insecurities and feels threatened by my presence at work. He tended to be especially hard and judgmental of my behavior and at one point was actively seeking to get me fired. I just put my time in, worked hard, kept my nose to the grindstone and hoped that someone else would notice the behavior as exemplary. A few months of this went by and he wanted to implement a weird grading metric by which he could measure productive standards. He called my supervisor in and straight up said that he needed to fire me and it was because I was a poor employee. And that started the biggest shit show of his life. My supervisor stood up for me, said I was nothing but spectacular, then proceeded to call in the other supers and his boss and explain to them that I was being targeted. He got talked to several times over the next few weeks and eventually made this incredibly inept apology. I basically said, screw you and your apology, you tried to get me fired for no reason other than your insecurities. He blustered and finally stormed off. Now, if I even suspect he's trying to assign me pointless projects, I tell him no, I'm busy and he can't say anything about it. I don't even have to run and tell anyone, they just jump on his case for me. Also found out that he's looking for work elsewhere for unrelated issues, so I'm pretty much in the clear now. TLDR, because I write too much, old boss hasn't been my boss for a few months. I'm leaving for a new jobs in 2 days. My new boss has signed for my departure to a new department. Old boss tried to fuck with my leaving date because he hates me. Turns out he can't take that decision and he looked ridiculous and mean for even trying. It happened 2 weeks ago at my job. I started job less than 2 years ago. The manager I had then is an old incompetent guy who loves being the boss. He's been sucking the life out of me from the beginning. A friend told me she didn't like to see me, who first started very enthusiastic and smiling, slowly becoming depressed and hating my job because of him. He's been criticizing everything I've done from the start. And I know I didn't do anything wrong at all. Unfortunately for him, thankfully for me, our team merged with another team 3 to 4 months ago. A job opening was made to become the manager of the team. So 2 possible applicants, my boss and the other team's boss. The other guy was the only applicant and got the job, so he became my new manager. My old boss didn't even apply. He's incompetent too. He's 1 year away from his retirement. Anyway, he basically kept his salary, but became just my colleague. No more my boss, although he's tried to boss me around, which I didn't let him anymore. I've been hating this job from the start because of him, and I've been depressed, so I applied to plenty of new jobs in the same company, and just a few weeks after we merged the 2 teams, I got a new one. Same salary but much more interesting. I got the news mid-June. I talked to my new manager and told him I was leaving, and he was okay with it because he knew I was unhappy. We agreed on the 1st of August. It was fast, but there was no point in me staying in a position I hated, and it's to stay at the same company anyway. Story starts 2 weeks ago. I come back from holiday, all happy and tanned and rested. I only have 2 weeks work left in that team. I'm planning finishing all my files and make sure I have finished everything else and all is in order. My new manager is on holiday. My old boss calls me. Apparently he has contacted the administrator, grade above him, and above my boss, to arrange for my departure date to be the 1st of November instead of the 1st of August. Reason is, he gets to do my job when I leave, because this stupid man has been pretending to work for months. He has nothing to do, and likes it that way. But he says his reason is, you're supposed to give a 3 months notice. 1 month is way too short, and it's illegal big stress for me. I was like, you can't do that. We have agreed on the 1st of August. I'm already on training for the new job and everybody in my new team have made arrangements for me to start on the 1st of August. Besides, I'm not leaving to another company, I stay in the same, so the 3-month rule doesn't apply. The guy is smiling, like he's very happy of himself, and he says that, since my manager is on holiday, he gets to take that decision, and besides the decision is coming from the administrator, so I can't do anything about it. I was furious and fuming. I told him exactly what I thought of him. It made him smile even more. So I left his office, because I was about to get nuclear, and I didn't want to risk to be sacked, because I have hit an old man with his own stapler. Another colleague, who can't stand him, sees that I'm in a horrible mood and very stressed out. She makes a few contacts. I was a wreck by them, completely lost for words, furious. I'm physically shaking from rage, because of that smug smile. I'm forever grateful to my colleague, because she actually sorted all out. Turns out my manager had made all the paperwork already before going on holiday, and everything had been signed off, so the administrator can't do anything about it. And it turns out the administrator had absolutely no clue of what was going on. He thought I was the one asking for a new date to leave, so he was gently obliging. For him August, September, or November makes no difference at all, because the salary would be paid all the same anyway. Old boss actually made up a whole web of lies to annoy everybody, because he hates me for not considering him my boss anymore. He's not, is he? He hates my new boss, because he actually gets things done, and he's nearly 20 years younger, and everybody likes him. So, he had to apologize to me. He didn't. He said, I'm sorry you reacted that way. It's not an apology, but whatever. I don't talk to him anymore, except to say good morning, and he had to go and explain to the administrator, who didn't give a flying fuck anyway, that I was going indeed to leave on the 1st of August. He looked absolutely ridiculous in front of the administrator, who couldn't understand why this stupid little man had annoyed him with a petty thing like this, while he has so much more important things to do. Everybody in my team make fun of old boss now. Anne. Oh yes. Today was my departure drink. My colleague who saved me isn't there tomorrow, so we had the drinks today. I'll just bring a cake tomorrow, and old boss wasn't invited. I don't even think he knows we all left together without him for lunch. We had mojitos that I paid for, then some nice food. There is a food truck kind of festival 5 minutes away from our work and the sun is still shining. Mojito and tortillas. What else? Edits. Spelling. Sorry, English is not my native language. Opened a restaurant for a stranger. Got the paperwork and all the time needed to keep the restaurant running. Devoted 6 days to work 10 to 12 hours every day for him. Managing, cooking, customer service, everything. This guy gave me $600 as my salary. I took it because I knew along the line that when I put in so much work and we succeed, I will eventually get a raise, and was dedicated to it. I had studied well in school and applied every trick in the books to get us the sales we need to survive. This was right out of college, and I felt proud of myself. I was 23 years old. This guy somehow thought you just open a restaurant and boom, money. He started telling me the prices are too cheap, that I'm pampering the customers too much, all kind of BS. He reduced my salary to $550, then to $500. When you already invested so much of your time, you don't wanna just quit. He started hiring the most shittiest people to work alongside me. As a manager, I'm supposed to have some authority. The people he hired comes, and this guy makes it seem like a competition. They steal money, I tell this guy. He don't give a shit. Even after camera that catches them, this guy don't care. The final moment was after he hired one crazy lady. This lady stink. Customers complains. She takes breaks to smoke right in front of the customers. This guy opened a business just to enjoy competition. One day he told me I'm not putting much effort and has planned to pay me hourly and has planned with his wife to cut my hours. I had already been so stressed. I told him in a text, I quit. Met him, took my last salary and left. This guy was shaking. The restaurant closed down after a few months. He lost everything. I have so much peace now. Not again. Never work for a fool. So I worked at a call center for a phone company, let's call them Tar&A. I'd worked there almost a year, and as a customer service rep, we can credit the caller's account with up to, but not necessarily, $200 long as we give some type of justification, which is reviewed at end of week point. The rules were very strict there though. If you were late twice coming into work, or back from a break, during a year-long period, they considered it grounds to fire you. This rigid rule system means they have a fresh cycle of low-paid employees that need not be given a raise after 1 year. When they fired someone, they always told them on a Friday to prevent a scene. Well, I was late once about 3 months into working there, and then again coming back from a break about 7 months later. I was late coming back from a break because I had been chatted up by a manager/friend in the break room and lost track of time. Not an excuse, but comes into play next. That manager/friend receives notice that I will be fired at the end of the current week, feels partly responsible, and tells me I should start looking for a new job. But he tells me this on a Tuesday. Typically each call is about 2 to 5 minutes long, going over some people's account or dealing with an issue. That comes out to somewhere between 81 to 135 calls during an 8-hour day, minus 1 hour lunch and a 15-minute break. Typically I would credit about 2 to 5 calls per day. But oh, not that week. That week I got into some real numbers. I was like Oprah crediting people's accounts. Your phone runs out of battery sometimes. How inconvenient. $200 can't find the settings button. $200 for your trouble. Just call to say hello. How nice of you. $200. By Thursday, I was hardly even answering the phone all the way. Thank you for calling Tar&A. Can I get your account information to start off? MMHMM credit $200. Hang up phone. I even skipped my lunch break that day to credit more people's accounts when confronted at the end of the week by a board of angry managers, including the one who told me I was to be fired. I was screamed at and threatened with a lawsuit. I sat quietly, pointed out company policy allowing me to take such action, and that being a AT&T customer for nearly 3 weeks is a perfectly justifiable reason to be credited $200. I was forced to take a long commute to a critical life or death type negotiation. Worst 2 weeks of my life. It was all impassable mountains. Was faking freezing. My eyelashes froze from tears caused by the wind blowing. Snot froze in my facial hair. Worst of all, when I finally got inside the only building there was a real flaming asshole I pretty much had to fight all day/night for 10D. He was a stubborn hothead and totally deserved what he had coming. I smote his ruin upon the mountain and got some fresh blazing white threads and highlights to match. Kept my old coat though, it was still okay. Finally regrouped my coworkers in a wooded/country location, but still wasn't where I needed to be, so we considered taking an Uber, but I'm not about that life. I whistle up some horses and take the most badass one for myself. Finally get to the negotiation and roll in with my coworkers, 4 deep, trying to talk to the guy in charge, only to be told by an ingratiating slimy dude running interference that I was late, or I late is the hour when I appeared. I told him to shut up and called him out as a witless worm. Guy in charge has enough of the shitstorm and tells me, literally, you have no power here. The balls on this guy. I knew there was nothing else to do but yank off my old coat and show off my new blinding white outfit. And after that we were cool. TLDR, always wear clean underwear.